Introduction.
Many people try to prove which day Yeshua was crucified and resurrected. Unfortunately, most arguments ignore important verses, assign special meaning to others, and make unspoken assumptions or unjustified references to passages that are not requested. In this video, I will begin by showing a countdown to the day of Passover, which begins 6 days earlier, and will use many diagrams to illustrate the details.
"6 days before the Passover. Thursday, Nisan 8.
It was Thursday, 6 days before Passover. After spending the night in Jericho at the house of Zacchaeus, Yeshua decided to walk towards Jerusalem, and a great crowd followed him. The winding road, over 50 kilometers long, was called the Way of Blood and followed the Wadi Kelt through a canyon. It began about 800 feet below sea level and ended about 2,600 feet above sea level at the Mount of Olives. When they reached Bethany, it was already late afternoon. After the disciples secured a colt, they probably spent the night in the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus.
5 days before the Passover. Friday, Nisan 9.
The next day, Yeshua, along with Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, was again among the people, teaching them how to follow God. A large crowd of visitors to the village drew attention, and Simon the leper heard about it. He immediately decided to organize a supper. He invited Lazarus, whom Yeshua had resurrected several weeks earlier, asked Martha to prepare the food for the guests, and sent servants to Jerusalem to invite some prominent Jews to the gathering. In the late afternoon, the supper was ready, all the guests arrived, and the feast began.
"4 days before the Passover. Sabbath, Nisan 10.
The supper was already in full swing when Mary squeezed into the narrow space between Yeshua and his neighbor to add some fruit to the table. She had waited for this moment and poured frankincense on Yeshua's head as an act of gratitude for freeing her from demons. She thought that in the dim light of oil lamps no one would notice her, but everyone smelt the aroma of the expensive perfume. Mary tried to hide the bottle, but realized her tears were falling on Yeshua's feet. She immediately began to wipe them with her hair until she heard the words, "When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial." This is how Yeshua fulfilled the foreshadowing of the Passover lamb, which was to be killed 4 days later. Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details.
Could Mary pour the perfume on Lord Yeshua's head some other time?
I guess that when she and her siblings went out on the streets on Friday, she heard that Yeshua was going to be killed. She did not want to show love by bringing flowers to funerals. She decided she needed to thank Yeshua for something far more valuable than the perfume she had, new life when he delivered her from demons. The evening atmosphere, with the lights dimmed at Simon's mansion, was the first opportunity to do so. Mary took the bottle with her when she went to Simon's house and created an opportunity to be close to him.
4 days before the Passover, Sabbath morning, Nisan 10.
In the morning, Yeshua entered Jerusalem through the Golden Gate on a donkey, considered to be an appropriate and prestigious method of transportation for royalty. The disciples covered the donkey with their garments. Other people took palm branches and spread them on the road. And this took place in order that what was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, lowly, and mounted on a donkey." Yeshua was acclaimed by the people as the King of the Jews. Later that day, a voice from heaven was heard, "I have both glorified it, and I will glorify it again." Yeshua explained that the voice announced his death as the true Passover lamb. The selection of the people was confirmed by God. Yeshua officially became the King of the Jews. After Yeshua entered Jerusalem, he stayed in its vicinity until his death, as foreshadowed by Jewish customs of keeping the Passover lamb inside the house to ensure that it is well looked after. He spent the nights on the Mount of Olives, maybe in the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details.
Working on the Sabbath, Nisan 10.
Some people argue that Yeshua could not enter Jerusalem on the Sabbath because it would mean the disciples broke the Sabbath by breaking palm branches to lay them before the king.
Does the Bible teach anywhere that people could not break palm branches on Saturday?
We know that the Pharisees accused Yeshua of allowing his disciples to work on the Sabbath by rubbing grain heads to eat when they were hungry. Yeshua defended the disciples by citing from the book of Samuel, teaching that human needs take precedence over strict rituals. He also drew their attention to priests who work in the temple every Sabbath and remain without guilt. But he is far greater than temple rituals because he is Lord of the Sabbath, and those who serve him on the Sabbath break the Sabbath and are innocent.
Does this mean the disciples could break palm branches on Sabbath and remain without guilt?
If Yeshua allowed them to do it, they would remain without guilt. But they did not have to, because the Bible clearly distinguishes between the disciples who laid their garments on a donkey and others who were cutting branches from the trees. Also, why would Yeshua enter Jerusalem on a day other than his own day, Saturday Sabbath? According to God's design, the disciples did not cut branches on the Sabbath, although it would have been perfectly okay if they had.
Why Palm Sunday?
The Bible does not say the disciples broke palm branches, it says, others were cutting branches from the trees and spreading them in the road. The disciples only laid their garments on donkeys. It is wrong to teach something and pretend the Bible teaches it.
Why do people do it?
Some may do it because they repeat what others say, others do it to justify what they already do and want to be true, ignoring other teachings in the Bible.
3 days before the Passover, Sunday, Nisan 11.
On the next day, they going out of Bethany, he was hungry. He found nothing but leaves. Another significant event on Sunday was driving out the money changers from the temple. This fulfilled the foreshadowing of removing leaven from households before eating the Passover lamb on Nisan 15 in the life of Yeshua.
Why did Yeshua dislike merchants and money changers in the temple?
Providing travelers with currency exchange and the purchase of sacrificial animals was essential. However, transforming the temple into a noisy marketplace that exploited visitors seeking to reconnect with God was problematic. Such a scene could deter people from visiting the temple, which Yeshua described as a place to meet with him. Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details.
Two days before the Passover, Monday, Nisan 12.
At the end of the day, when evening came, he went out of the city and spent the night on the Mount of Olives. The next morning, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. Peter remembered that it was the same tree Yeshua had cursed the previous day. At the end of the account of all events on Nisan 12, Matthew and Mark inform readers that it was still 2 days before the Passover.
Why was it important to emphasize that it was still the same day, Nisan 12, 2 days before the Passover?
The countdown to Passover has stopped 2 days before Passover for very important reasons. At this point, Luke uses a flashback to provide a concise summary of the last few days of Yeshua, who was teaching daily in the temple, but the chief priests and the scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to destroy him. This summary shows that the Jewish leaders sought to kill Yeshua during those days, which run in parallel with other events already described in detail, day after day.
Why is this summary not written 1 day later, at the end of the countdown period?
Because Luke makes another flashback that ends at the same point. In another flashback, Luke explains that during the last few days Yeshua was teaching in the temple, but during the night he would go out and spend it on the mount called of Olives. This detail from Yeshua's life is important because God decided that a lamb selected to die as a Passover lamb had to be taken care of and stay at home. Yeshua, the true Passover lamb, spent the last few nights since the Sabbath in the home of his friends, Mary, Martha and Lazarus, whose house was on the Mount of Olives, no more than 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. Luke designed both flashbacks to end on Monday, Nisan 12, before Nisan 13 begins. Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details. At the same point in the countdown, Matthew and Mark also include their own flashbacks, both reaching back to Nisan 10 to recount Mary anointing Yeshua for burial.
Why did they choose to place their flashbacks here rather than follow chronological order?
It is very unusual that both refer to the same event and choose the same point in the countdown as Luke did for his flashbacks. It must be a very important point where the 5 timelines end. Right after mentioning the anointing, Matthew and Mark note that from that moment, Judas began seeking an opportunity to betray Yeshua. He was certainly upset with Yeshua, who did not support his suggestion to sell the perfume and made his anointing for burial more significant than helping the poor. For Judas, the opportunity to sell the expensive perfume was lost, and his money box remained thin. By the end of Nisan 12, Judas was still looking for the right moment to betray Yeshua for a price much lower than he could have got for selling the perfume. At this moment, all 5 timelines have ended.
Resumed narratives.
After the mysterious silence about Nisan 13, which seems like a grande finale, how will Matthew, Mark, Luke and Yohanan resume their narratives? Matthew counts down to "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming," as stated by Yeshua. He recalls the story of Yeshua being anointed a few days earlier and of Judas seeking an opportunity to betray Yeshua. He then suddenly turns to the first day of unleavened bread, when Yeshua asked the disciples to go into the city to a certain man, and say to him, "The teacher says, 'My time is near, I am keeping the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" How is it that the day of unleavened bread has already arrived, yet the Passover is still in the future? The festival of unleavened bread begins on Nisan 15, and the Passover should be celebrated on Nisan 14. Mark follows the same pattern. Yeshua was anointed in Bethany. Judas looked for an opportunity to betray Yeshua, and, on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" Mark adds one detail: the unleavened bread fell on the day the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, which is exactly Nisan 14. But the problem remains: why should the first day of unleavened bread fall on Nisan 14? Luke followed the pattern established by Matthew and Mark. Immediately after describing Judas seeking an opportunity to betray Yeshua, he discusses the first day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed and the Passover still being in the future. Yohanan bypasses all events that occurred on Sunday and Monday. The last event he mentioned was Sabbath afternoon, Nisan 10, when the voice came from heaven, and the next one is late afternoon on Nisan 14 when Yeshua washed the disciples' feet during supper. Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details.
Narration has started, Nisan 14.
Surprisingly, nobody mentioned the start of a new day after Monday, Nisan 12. Nobody recorded even one event for Tuesday, Nisan 13, and everybody is talking about Wednesday, Nisan 14, while 2 mornings are clearly not mentioned. Would all 4 writers intentionally camouflage something strange about their reports? On Nisan 14, when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, Yeshua washed the disciples' feet, and it was already the first day of unleavened bread. How to keep track of events on the last day before the Passover and the first day of the festival of unleavened bread? Feel free to pause the video now to look over the details.
Will be continued.
The answers to the above questions, and more, will be provided in episode 2. See you there in a bit.